Pro Debates is back, and he said we should have reasonable restrictions on guns. You shouldn't be able to alter guns to fire at a certain rate or have ammo capacities that are extreme. Does anyone remember the Parkland shooting? There was a school resource officer there. The person with the gun didn't save them. Parkland had someone with a gun and it didn't stop the shooter. What about the recent school shooting where when the cops got there, they didn't stop it? It's almost like more guns doesn't fix the problem. And just a quick side note, 94% of mass shootings happen at gun-free zones. Also, 75% of mass shootings happen with pistols. Just a side note.
Tyler's from Texas. In case you didn't know that before, you know it now.
Well, Pat did a long deep dive on this, and we did a bunch of research for what is the problem with guns. And this was just after Uvalde. And it was a lot of information. It's a good watch because it is interesting to see. There are certain regulations that you can put in place, but the majority of these mass shootings happen in gun-free zones. And not to mention, the media deceive you. They say there's been 276 mass shootings this year. But what they don't go to tell you is that a mass shooting is simply an instance wherein 4 or more people are shot.
Right.
It's not 4 or more people die or what. That's a mass murder, right? It's just 4 or more people are shot. You could have 77 people shot and they've all been shot in the toe and they're going to be fine.
Right.
So it's misleading.
I think that point about Uvalde and the law enforcement is an important point, which is that what you saw unfold there was law enforcement on the scene. I mean, it was just gross negligence. It was disgraceful, actually, what went on there. I don't know what the consequences have been for those officers, but they should be steep. So, again, just because you have people armed there, that doesn't mean that they're going to... Right, if they're standing in the hallway, they're afraid to go in. Right, that's a problem. That's a huge problem that needs to be addressed, 100%. And you have oftentimes other issues that happen, like people who are repeat offenders, people who should never have had access to a gun to begin with because there is mental illness in their file, or you can look back and then something terrible happens and all of a sudden a million people come out and say, well, I knew that he was crazy because this happened and I knew this, but they don't report it, or there's not a coordinated file that's kept on that person. So of course, somebody with mental illness should not be walking around, legitimate mental illness. And I know the slippery slope on that too, because think about government making a decision as to who's mentally ill. I'd be next because they don't like what I say. So there's that too. But when you talk about capacities and stuff, what guns can and can't do, you have to always just remember something, is that the criminal on the street or the person seeking to inflict harm, they don't have limitations on their guns, right? They're not going to be like, well, I'm going to go shoot up a movie theater, but I need to, obey the gun law. Let me make sure that I only have this amount of magazine. No, they're not doing that. They're looking out to produce maximum harm. So when you limit those things, oftentimes you limit it for law-abiding people. You don't limit it for the people seeking to impose harm. And then what happens, right? Like they always say, why do you need, a semi-automatic weapon to defend your home? And I say, well, what about the single mom out living in a rural area with, she's got her son in there and somebody comes with a semi-automatic to her front door and tries to kill her? Like, why do you want her weapon to be less than? So, and I'm not a weapons expert. Like I said, I bring people on to talk about this stuff because I'm not a gun expert. I've shot guns, but I'm not somebody who's I didn't grow up with that as part of my culture. So if you want to have somebody on to talk about that, we can. I have a few people in mind who I think would be fantastic to really talk about what's really going on and what would actually fix the problem. I do believe that certain regulations could be put on the books. But again, I'm going to tell you that these people who seek to destroy, they don't care about any of this stuff.
They're going to do what they did in Canada and mass stab people.
Right.
Or they're going to do what they did in Boston and blow the place up. Or they're going to drive a car through a parade. Or they're
going to get the guns. They're going to get them anyway.
And
they're going to get them anyway.
The point is I want it to be an unfair fight. If somebody's trying to break into my home, I want it to be an unfair fight. You bet your ass. Mm-hmm. I want to have 6 magazines available. I want to have 150 rounds, right? I want to have a scope. I want it to be lit up. I want to have body armor. I want to protect myself and my family. I don't want it to be a fair fight.
That's right.
If somebody's stupid enough to break in my home, what do you want me to say? Oh, excuse me, while I get my government regulated,
authorized.
Right, my government authorized magazine.
Yeah.
I'm out of ammunition. Give me a second. Got to change. I can only put 10 rounds in here. You know,
and then what happens to you, and then the people who say, and oftentimes I think the people who say these arguments, like I've had many conversations with New York City liberals. You go into a city like New York and you hear sirens everywhere. There's this sense that the police, who some people have an immense amount of trust in, they're right there, right? There's this sense that you pick up, you call 911 and they're there, right? Because you hear them around you all the time. That's not how it is in large parts of the country where there's, you've got your land and then you've got a long drive to get to somebody else's land. And if you pick up the phone and you call for law enforcement to show up, it takes them a while. It's a very different reality that it's very hard for city dwellers to understand. So you have to, a lot of the people who are often making these cases for Second Amendment rights are people who don't have the luxury of feeling that police are so accessible all the time. By the way, it's false. It's very false in those cities. That's a false sense, because what happens in cities like New York is the traffic. It becomes really hard for the cops to actually get to you. Also, you have defund police movements in those areas. Police don't feel supported, and police just kind of don't do their job a lot of times, truthfully, because they don't want to deal with the nightmare of the bureaucracy. So it's a false sense of police readiness. And being able to be there right at the scene right away. It just doesn't work like that. Even when you call an ambulance in a place like Manhattan, it can take a very long time. They have to weave in and out of a ton of traffic. So it's a false sense of security, but it is a sense of security that people have in those cities nonetheless.
Well, and they rank the top 10 major cities. Chicago, 3.5 minutes. Los Angeles, 6 minutes. Seattle, 7 minutes. Dallas, 8 minutes. Miami, 8 minutes. New York, 9 minutes. Mm-hmm. Houston, 10 minutes. What do you think can be done? Not even 10 minutes. How much damage do you think can be done in 3.5 minutes?
Think about that. Think about New York, 9 minutes. 9 minutes.
And that's average, right?
Right. So somebody comes to your door, causing trouble, breaks the door in. You're there. You've got kids. You've got, you let's say you're lucky enough. You get to a room, you close the door behind you, call the police. You're going to go now, when this podcast ends, go now and sit quietly with nothing, no phone, nothing. Set an alarm for 9 minutes. 9 minutes. And just put the phone there and just sit. It will be the longest 9 minutes of your life. Just think about that time frame the next time you make an argument that's like, oh, just call the police. A lot can happen in 9 minutes and you don't even want to think about what that could be. So I think people's eyes are opening, even in liberal cities. We had Kim Iverson on the other day, and she was saying that even in Los Angeles, she had been hearing about a lot of people during COVID, because the crime was so bad, that we're talking about getting a gun, who had never talked about that before. So it's, people's eyes are going to be open to that more and more as time passes. Just not a realistic position to take, that it's like, oh, just call the police and wait out 9 minutes. And think about if you're in a rural, please, it could be 15 minutes you're waiting for somebody to show up at your door to offer help. And who's to say they're going to be able to provide help? No one's going to. The other opinion about this, which is really important, is people feel like no one's going to protect my family the way I would. Think about, you got kids out there. Is anyone going to be as passionate to protect your child as you are? No, it's just not. It's not going to happen. Right. If you like the short clip, you can catch another one here, or you can catch the full episode right here.